Ben, welcome to the Health Path podcast. It's really exciting to reconnect after quite a few months.
It really is. Yeah, it's beautiful to see you. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for sparing the time and coming on. I've been really looking forward to kind of catching up with you and hearing you share your journey, what you get up to, your experience, your insights. Although we work, I guess, in slightly different fields, my opinion is they're deeply interconnected at the same time. And certainly the sorts of conversations I'm having with clients, we often navigate to kind of heart-based conversations, if I put it like that, because it's such a foundational part of human health, well-being, and how we thrive as humans. But with the fact that we work in, I guess, slightly different fields, many of our listeners, our community, might not yet be familiar with you or your work. So, are you happy just to sort of share a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, I am. Yeah. Thank you. I could make this forever, so I'll keep it. I'll keep it condensed. Um, where do I start? In short, I was your typical man up until the age of 13. I don't mean that disrespectfully at all or negatively. I just had no concept of personal development or growth, or my vision was very much, or my perspective was very much, I am what I am and make the best of it. That's there's no changing. And then at 30, I started working with a coach about a physical challenge that I had around sex, where I struggled to orgasm. And I kind of decided that I want to have kids at some point and I want to have a sexually fulfilling relationship. Now is the time to get on with this. And if she told me at that point that she was going to open me up to my emotions and teach me to be vulnerable and open and all this stuff, I'd have been like, you're all right, thanks, not my journey. But for the purpose of wanting a different sex life, I was like, let's work together and I'm open to wherever you're going to take me and let's do this. And she didn't say anything about that deeper stuff. I was like, cool. So I went on a journey without knowing it, thinking I was going to become some kind of sex guru. And instead, she turned me into this emotional, open-hearted man that I am in theory today. Well, not in theory, I'll own it. That's where I am. So it's been crazy. I'm 41 now, so it's been 11 years of understanding myself and going deep into this work. And yeah, I now find myself in a place where I'm a human potential coach. And most recently, in fact, since I've seen you, I've become a breathwork practitioner too, which has been amazing. And yeah, my goal is really just to help people with the journey that I've been on, which is to understand themselves better and to live a life of more purpose and meaning. Um, and it's an honour to be able to have that opportunity to do that.
Beautiful. And it's interesting, I guess, the your entrance into this journey, being what it was. One of the questions I thought that I might ask you beforehand was whether there was a kind of a key moment where you were like, enough is enough. I need to understand myself better. I need to explore these things. But it sounds like there was a bit of a different sort of route in ultimately.
There was, and it's been a real lesson for me actually, because sex is a great route in for men to do the work, or relationships, and because as men, like I said about me at that point, if she'd said to me, Ben, like we need to get you more connected to your emotions, we need to open up, you need to be expressing yourself more, and all this stuff, the average man on the street is going to be like, no, I'm okay, thanks. I don't like, I'm doing okay. I don't need any of that stuff. That's for my wife or whatever. And that was my perception, but I was willing to do this stuff because of sex. And I think so often challenges in our relationship or physical challenges around sex, or just even the possibility of wanting to have a better sex experience, like for example experiencing tantra or going into that field, understanding that there is more potential in all of us, is a more empowering way, I think, for men to do work than to go, shit, there's limitations in me. It's really bad that I'm not emotional enough, or I don't talk enough, or I'm not connected enough to my wife, or all these things. It's like, whoa, that's a problem. Actually, and that's why I love the title of Human Potential Coach and why I've gone down that route, because I want people to see it like there's more in all of us. And there is limitations in all of us, sure, but that limitation is an opportunity to become better. Don't see it as a problem. See it as like, there's room for growth. You can become more. Everything you're experiencing now can be better if you're willing to be vulnerable enough and open enough to acknowledge that you don't have the answers to everything.
Yeah. No, I think that's a beautiful way of looking at it. Sort of the potential that is there, laying dormant, maybe that we can tap into. Um, and a question that comes up then, I guess, is, from your perspective, why, if we talk about men, but it's obviously true for both sexes, from a perspective of men, what creates this issue in the first place, do you think? What is it that means that we're guarding our hearts, that we're wearing a mask, for example, and only showing certain elements of our true selves?
God, yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And I think there are so many answers to this, and but I will come down to the main one that I believe is my experience, and that is that we aren't shown a different, we aren't shown that way. You know, what I mean by that is from as young as I can remember as a child, I looked at the men around me and they didn't ever show me that it was okay to be emotional or okay to express or okay to be vulnerable, okay to be open to growth. Any of this stuff, it was that stoic, rigid, get on with it, be tough. And what I saw from the world is if I wanted to thrive as a man, that I needed to be strong, tough, brave, unemotional, and I get shit done. I'd be judged on what I achieved, not what I was feeling. And that was everything. That was everywhere. It was James Bond. It was Terminator. It was Rambo. It was Arnie. It was Sylvester Stallone. That they were the men. That was how to thrive. And there was nothing that showed me that it was okay as a man to experience all the other sides. Not okay, important, in fact. And so right from the age of as young as I can remember, I was being who I wasn't true at heart. I was trying to be who I thought I needed to be. I wasn't allowing myself to be who I really was, which is a soft, sensitive, kind, emotional man. And the world told me that's not the way to thrive. And I think there's so much pain in so many men because they're being what actually isn't true for them in their heart. And they've been it for so long that they don't even realize that it's not true for them. They're so in that pattern. Like I really believed I was certain things. I really believed I just wasn't emotional. At the age of 30, before I started doing any work, I was like, it's just not me. People call me dead inside. I wore it as a badge of honor. I just thought some people are emotional, some people aren't, and I'm not one of them because I've been it for so long. And really, like I've done so much work with so many different men, and I've seen how tough and strong and closed they can be. Not to say we can't be open and strong, by the way, like, but they're so like stuck in that pattern. They can't let anything be entering. They can't be sharing. They can't be expressing. They can't be open. And yet, when you have time with them, and you allow them the space and you give them the opportunity to understand and to see that there is a softer side to them as well, not to take away the masculine side, but there is that part too, then it's always there. It's always there. It's just we've become so disconnected to it for so long that we don't even know it's present. So my really long answer, I'm sorry, my big rant
That's
to
great.
your question is that I just want boys to be able to see that it's okay to be all of these parts. I go back to the male archetypes, to be a warrior, a lover, a magician, and that's when they'll be the king, not just the warrior, which is what I saw in the world.
Yeah. And I think that's such a beautiful way of putting it. I think there's a cultural, societal problem fundamentally, and it's so embedded within the system that it's hard to see otherwise. As you say, the Hollywood films, but sports as well. I'm a lover of sports, but you need the warrior within that realm. But unfortunately, I think sometimes that warrior then enters other areas of life, and everything is just about being the warrior. And the pressure that I can only imagine professional athletes are under, maybe that's one of the reasons why that identity is all about being whatever sportsman or woman they are.
Completely, and that's a massive problem. And the pain, I've seen it firsthand of professional sportsmen come out of their game and that they don't know who they are and they're lost, and the internal pain that causes, and then the reaction in their behaviour as a result, and they start becoming someone they don't want to be, and they hate themselves, they can't look at themselves in the mirror, and all because of this. And I think it's so important that, and this is for women too, but we are given permission, and this is absolutely the core of my message and what I want from the world, is just to allow us all to be all of who we are. And we're all different, but we've all got a lot of aspects to us. We're not stuck in this We are not all just one part. We are many parts. You know, almost, when I say this, almost the term bipolar comes up. We almost sort of categorize someone. Well, 1 minute he's happy, 1 minute he's sad, 1 minute he's strong, 1 minute he's crying. Like, I don't know who he is. I don't understand it. And it's like, yeah, there's many parts to me, and that's beautiful and powerful. It's. I'm not saying bipolar isn't a thing, by the way, but it's, you know, we categorize it that way. When I want to be, at times, I need to be strong and tough, and I need to get shit done. But if I bring that into my relationship at all times, and I don't let someone into my heart, I'm not going to have the best relationship, and I'm going to feel a lot of sadness and emptiness within around that. It's really important that I know and I connect with, and I can fit into and be the lover and the magician. That's when we feel complete. That's when we're being all of who we can be. That's when we're alive inside. And I don't see many people walking around being all of who they can be, because we've been limited by society.
Yeah. And, you know, what came up there was sport and athletes might be a good example, but this is true for all of us when we think around what happens with retirement, for example. So there's that kind of spike in deaths because people have lost that identity of career, because it's just such a fundamental part of society. You know, we are our job. You go to a barbecue, you meet new people, and one of the first questions is, what do you do? It's not, you know, what do you enjoy doing, what your hobbies are. It is all about kind of that identity. So as you say, understanding that we've got all of these different parts, I think is a really liberating concept, and it encourages us to tap into some of these other things that, you know, certainly from my experience, we might have had in the past. Hobbies, for example, you know, how many of our clients have lost passions for things they used to love, and that's kind of a sign of burnout, and burnout can come from wearing one mask way too much, I think.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, completely. I'm so with you, and with that, I think it's so important for us to realize, and this is part of the problem, I think, is that if we embrace the inner lover within us, then we think that means we're no longer a warrior, because the warrior is like, needs to be this way all the time. And if I show any chink of weakness, it means I'm not tough. The more I go on this journey, I love to see the contrasts in people. I love them to show me how strong they can be and how soft they can be. And neither one of them takes away from the other part. It's just a fullness of their expression of who they can be. And I always come back to, there's two parts that I think of. I come back to like Samoan or Fijian or Tongan rugby players who are these warriors on the pitch. They're so tough, and you look at them and you're like, geez, like, I would hate to mess around with those guys. They are like animals, for use of a better word. You know, they're crazy. And then you see them on the pitch after, and they're like poking each other, like, "I love you, brother," and they're like so like they're like cuddly teddy bears. And it's just like, in that moment, right there, they're showing you the spectrum of who they can be. So, and they are completely different people. And then I think of the film 300, Leonardus, like the warrior that, like, follow me, men, and they will follow him, and he will lead into battle, and he is the ultimate warrior in that sense, like the leader, so powerful. He comes home to his wife after battle, and she is his queen, and he's soft as you see him on his knees, like surrendering into her feminine brilliance. And again, there's that he doesn't need to continue to be a warrior. He knows he's a warrior. I don't have to play that all the time. I can soften, I can surrender, and I can allow that energy to come alive too. And we just lost that, I think. And I love to see the contrasts in people. Partly because for me, it's freedom. I want to be all of those parts in me. I don't want to hide the softness. I don't want to hide the toughness. I want to be able to embrace all of it at different times when they're alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said there, I just almost want to sort of reiterate this idea that leaning into that softness, into the lover archetype, doesn't take away from the warrior or the king or the magician. And I think that's a really important point, because I think it's a common narrative that we have as men. I mean, we shared offline that I came back from a 10-day sort of retreat on Friday, and Friday morning was sort of, in some ways, kind of the homecoming. It was the day we were all leaving, and there were 60 of us almost that had come from every corner of the world, who had come together for these 10 days. And it had been, I think, for all of us, 10 of the most transformational days in our lives. And there was a lot of emotion there. And I sat there during one of the sort of the sharing circles, and I had this realization that, and I've had the realization for a while, that if I lean into it, there's a heaviness in my heart at times, and there's definitely still a bit of a guard that can come up. And I realized that one of the reasons why I think it's there is because I can feel so much. And when I do, emotions can arise that, I'm not used to, that I might feel are uncomfortable. And there's also, I think, a belief that if I allow that to come up, and if I really feel those feelings, which can be everything from the climate crisis through to the pain so many of us hold, there's a fear that I'm not going to be able to continue, especially in that kind of doing warrior mentality of I've just got to keep doing. I've got to keep serving. I don't really matter. Let's just go and help the world, kind of thing. And it was just really powerful and interesting to actually really lean into that and become aware of the story behind the behaviors, I guess, ultimately. So trying to bring a question into this for you, Ben, you've done a lot of work in this area, and I've heard you say on different podcasts before that you can see sometimes men coming to certain sort of retreats, and they're kind of cross-armed, they're guarded, they're on their phones, and you see them kind of unfold and open as the days progress. Do you ever see almost a journey whereby there's an increase in resistance because that there's an awareness that something's starting to unfold, and maybe actually that brings up fear before that surrender, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it can open up a can of worms, can't it? It's like we're so protected. If I let you know this, then what else like comes out of all this? Is my wife going to leave me? Am I going to lose my job? My whole identity is wrapped up in protecting all this stuff. What happens if I open it all up? And yeah, absolutely. And I understand that, and fear is a real thing, of course, at times, and we don't want a lot of these things to happen. But realistically, the weight as well of living with buried, stored truths that you can't express is so unhealthy. It's such a cause. I mean, you'll probably know better about this than me, but that is a real stress, a real weight to carry, a real grievance on the body, and we're not free. So much of my work always feels like, I call my programs "Find Your Freedom." I want people to let go of the weights of everything that we're carrying. I don't know. Are we really alive if we're burying all this stuff within us? If we're not, if we can't express things, if we're creating barriers and armor around us, armor is heavy. Do we want to live that way? For me, like the way I see it and the way I live when I'm with people, we are all going to make mistakes, including me. What defines me is whether or not I'm willing to be able to sit with that and genuinely work to move beyond it, or bury it and hide it and pretend not let anyone see it, ignore it and let it eat me up in the inside, and I carry that weight forever. If I'm in a relationship, it's almost like I don't care if you screw up, just let me into that pain, let me into that shame, and we can let go of it, because I don't want to be tempted to connect to you when you're carrying that level of shame, when you're carrying that level of armor, because now there's a wall between us, and I can feel that wall. And I think for so many of us in our relationships, there is a big wall around us. People can't really get in to really feel the depth of the connection as a result. And so I really respect, the fears and some of the challenges, but life is so much more liberated. There is so much more freedom in owning the fact that we've made mistakes, the fact that we're not perfect, but now you can feel me, I'm owning this and I want to move beyond it because I don't want to be that person anymore. That for me is beautiful and draws me into people, and that for me is being alive. Does that answer the question? I hope so.
Yeah, I think so. I think, as you say, it's moving past the fear ultimately, and I do think there is a huge amount of fear around these sorts of journeys. And I guess another way of putting it is my journey so far has shown me how much fear there is within me of letting go, of being witnessed, of being vulnerable. And I go back to a week of breathwork training in 2020, whereby I think it was the last breath session. So we'd had probably 12 or 13 sessions before this, but it was this last one where I finally was able to access just deep sadness. And there was just a period of crying. And as you used the word freedom, and once you've let that emotion out and you've processed it, there's spaciousness, there's freedom. You can physically feel so much more freedom for it, and it starts to give you a message that it's safe to do this, it's okay to do it, I can do it again. And I think it starts kind of a positive snowball effect.
Yeah, yeah, that's so beautiful. I'm so with you. And how beautiful is it to do that in partnership, in a relationship? You know, how amazing, how connected do you feel to someone when they let you into that part of their world? That's where relationships go to another level. And I think so many of us are scared to let our partners see the real us. But the truth is, in never letting them see the real us, we're always limiting the depth of our connection. And in this day of age of temptation and an opportunity everywhere, I feel it's more important than ever that we do connect to deep levels. That's what keeps us. That's what keeps nourishing the relationships. So I so hear you, and it's beautiful. For me, it's a gift. It's an honor. It's like when someone lets me into that part of the world and I see them more deeply. I'm so there with them. You know, that's beautiful. That's human connection.
Mm.
Yeah.
And no, I guess the saying that comes to mind is we can only meet people to the level that we've met ourselves as well. If you're not willing to go there and show that emotion when someone else shows it, it can be quite um well, not traumatic, but it can be incredibly uncomfortable, shall we say. So the fact that you have said that shows to us that you've been on a very powerful journey, because you almost long for that authenticity and that vulnerability.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I believe so, and you know, for me, that always harpers back to this place that if I can't hold space for my own difficult emotions, if I can't sit with myself in pain and sadness, I'm not going to be able to sit with you in your pain and sadness. I'll run, but the emotion is too uncomfortable. If I can really learn to sit with my own pain, my own sadness, and not be scared of it, not to judge it, not to make it right or wrong or bad or whatever else, but just to acknowledge this is part of the journey and I'm going to be here. And if it brings tears, it brings tears. I celebrate the lightness after it. I celebrate the releasing. I celebrate the humanness. And in doing that, it allows me to then sit in the space with somebody else when they're feeling that, and not to judge their emotion either in the same way, but just to be with it and to give them the space to express it without judgment. That's freedom for them too. That's deeply, like a deeply connecting experience. And no one's teaching us any of this, particularly as men. And yet, you know, for me, like so much of what I'm doing at the moment is that like relationships are so essential, so at our core as human beings. You know, experiencing something, we can see the most beautiful sunset, and it can really fill us up. But it means that bit more when there's someone with us, and we can see it with them. Relationships are so powerful that we're not taught how to sit with other people's emotions. We're not taught to sit how with our own emotions. If we block out and we deny emotions and we limit them, we numb ourselves like I really did. I'm always limiting the depths of the experience that I can have with somebody else. If we have deep connections, we have deep relationships, meaningful connections, like that means so much. Like I really believe, like you know, the best things in life are free, and we live in a world right now where we're so used to chasing everything, and that's where COVID brought us back, almost back to this place. We don't have any, we can't go anywhere. But what we've got is our connections and our relationships and what we feel, and hopefully, you know, we all learned a lesson there that we can do work on that. We can learn to open ourselves up, feel more, experience more, create more depth in our relationships, and that can empower us in our life in so many areas.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
as you say, sort of that concept of the best things are free. And we need to cultivate a bit of space, a bit of time in our lives. So many of us are so busy going from one thing to the next, and almost consciously trying to fill all of the time and space in our day. And we just need to kind of, I guess, start to dismantle that concept, which I guess goes back to the beginning of our conversation around, as a society, we identify so much with the doing and not so much with the being. Um, but I think that space and that time is needed to be able to just to start to unpick some of these things, to unpick our behaviors and our habits. Where do they come from? What purpose did they potentially once serve that perhaps they no longer do? I think that's another really common theme that we see from a client and a behavioral perspective, these kind of maladaptive behaviors that once were helpful in a stressful type of situation. There was something that just came to mind, and I want to see if I can remember it because it was based on what you were sharing. It's gone. It might come back.
I was going to just add to what you just said, though, actually,
Yeah.
around, if you don't mind, that whole judgment around what we do, and I really believe that's a big problem for us all, men and women, because we are judged. You're so right on what we do. Like you say, asking what job we do, whatever else. And I think a beautiful alternative is to ask someone, what do you love, rather than what do you do. Like, hear what they love. Beautiful. Then you're hearing something meaningful. But I do get it that we are judged on what we do because it's usually visible, it's usually measurable. I don't know how you're feeling. I can't see sitting here. I can get a sense from emotion intelligence what's within you, but I can't really judge you on what you're feeling, what's going on in your inner world. But I can look at the house you live in, the car you've got, the job that you've got. Is very measurable, is very visible. And I think so many of us are preoccupied in this world of trying to impress everybody else, not consciously. Like, none of us are going, I'm going to get this because it will impress everyone else. But we're all seeking acceptance and validation and this identity of being successful. It makes us feel good in some capacity, but it's not deeply nourishing. It's not really nourishing us on the inside. I think so many of us have this sense that something's missing and we can't work out because we've painted the whole shiny picture, but it doesn't feel enough because we haven't actually ever really connected that there is stuff beyond that. And ultimately what I'm coming to is this relationship with self. Like, there's a poem that I always refer to called "The Face in the Glass." It says, you can go through life getting pats on the back, but none of it matters if you don't have a relationship with the face in the glass. That's what counts. It's like that's what's with you till the end. And all the time we don't have a relationship with ourselves. We don't know who we are at our core. We don't know what our values are. And I'm constantly finding my hand up towards my heart here, but like, who we are at our core, if we don't even know who we are at our core, and we give ourselves very little chance of living aligned to that, because the world will take us and tell us this is who you should be, and often that's not aligned to who we really are. We don't know that. We don't do the inner work. We don't sit in silence. We don't learn. We don't read. We don't go on retreat experiences. We don't work with someone who can help us understand ourselves better. We're never building a relationship with ourselves. We never build a relationship with ourselves. We can get all the stuff in the world, but there's always going to be some sense of emptiness. There's always going to be some sense of incompleteness. And the world teaches us that we've got to do, but we have to learn to go within. We have to learn to build that relationship.
Yeah, it reminds me of a really compassionate way of thinking about how so many of us are buying the next thing. And it was around the fact that we all, like you said, long for connection, long for a tribe. And if you live in an area where everyone's driving around in a BMW or Audi, well, one way we can connect and feel like we belong in that community is by keeping up and buying the Audi or the BMW. I thought that was a really nice way of just thinking that there's a beautiful intention behind the doing and the buying, and it's connection. It's feeling like you belong ultimately. There's just another level to that sort of process that can be, I guess, thought around, explored as well.
Totally, I'm so with you, and I'm a massive believer there's good reason behind every behaviour. And it's easy to judge the behaviour that we're doing these things, but it comes from a place that we can't understand. We don't know their story, we don't know their journey, and they may be doing this because of something that actually is really beautiful and powerful, but we just can't see it. Like you say, buying that car could be a longing for connection, and they don't even know that, by the way.
Right.
It's so deep in their psyche, they have no idea. But when we really address it back and we strip it all down, that's ultimately what it will come back to. Um, there's always good reason behind every behaviour.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it right. Doesn't mean it's okay always, but there can be some understanding.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point. I've heard you share a story of a friend of yours who went to jail and had an incredibly tough upbringing. And going back to what you said earlier, Ben, around we're not taught certain things that are fundamental to thriving as a human. I don't think we're taught how to just take a step back and be curious, be curious about someone's journey, their story, what might have led to a certain behavior. We kind of, a lot of the time, we jump to an assumption and then we label that person as bad or troubled or whatever it may be. And I think there's such beauty in being able to bring curiosity to every experience, every story that we are being told, because as you said, we don't know the whole story. We barely know our own full story.
Completely, completely. Yeah, I'm so with you. I think it's so important. And for me, judgment lives in our heads. It's all created here, in our heart, like outside of our head. When we let go of all the thoughts, we are compassionate beings. It is at our core, and that's so important. I always feel drawn to the whole Will Smith affair at this point, because for me, it's such a clear story, and I saw so many judgments in every different respect. And I'm not making any of them right or wrong, by the way, but just so many judgments everywhere on Will Smith and Chris Rock, wasn't it? Around that whole thing, and this was bad and that's bad, and you can't do this and you can't do that. And of course, like it's not acceptable to ever raise your hand to anyone in that capacity. Totally, I understand that, and I'm with that. But with a little bit of understanding, the story does change, and it's crazy. I don't know if you know this, but Will Smith wrote in his book, which I think was released something like 6 months before that event, so very recently before that event, and he wrote how he'd experienced, I can't remember, as an early teenager or around the age of 12 or 13, I think he said, when his father abused his mother very badly, physically, and he let it pass. And I might not be getting all the intricacies of the story right here, by the way, but it's the general perspective. And he watched it and he saw it and he didn't step in. And from that point onwards, he labelled himself a coward. And he said, all the things that I've ever achieved, and this is written in his book, all the things I've ever achieved, I still come back to this place where I tell myself that I'm a coward, and that hurts. And then we fast forward back to this event where he's sitting there and Chris Rock tells this joke and he laughs and he looks over at his wife and she's not laughing, she's not finding it funny, and suddenly in that moment his story comes alive. That's so raw. Don't be a coward. Don't be a coward. And so we can't understand that. We haven't been through that. We are deeply complex. That what goes through him in that moment is entirely different to what goes through me or you or someone else. And so that's what leads him to his behaviour. Not making his behaviour okay, but we might have a little bit of context around what drove him, because he's not thinking like you and I are or anyone else is. He's thinking in his own way. Now, obviously, again, it comes. He's got to see that, and I believe he has seen that, and it's not okay for him to react that way. There's things for him to unpack and to understand that he's not a coward, and there are better ways to react in that situation. But that context for me takes the charge out of all our judgments and all the fear and the hatred and the judgment of bad and wrong and division, and we're all doing the best with what we know. And the more we can see that in one another, the better the world will be, and it's a nicer place for us to live in ourselves, and it's a nicer place for the people around us to live in. And there's not enough of it for me. And that story, the amount of judgment I saw at that point just showed me where we live in this world, and everyone's so quick to, this is not okay, and that's not okay, and what about this, and what about that? No understanding. And sorry, that's my rant for today.
No, that's heartbreaking and powerful at the same time, and is a perfect example of what we're talking about ultimately. And I think, just to honor your perspective there, to be able to sit kind of on the fence, to be able to understand polar opposite concepts, arguments, perspectives is hard. And again, it shows someone who's done the work and is able to see things differently, and to make that kind of or to make a choice around what feels right, but to be able to share that compassion and that wisdom that there's always more than one perspective to a story and experience. And often in the experience, polar opposite statements can both be simultaneously true. There is no one truth. And that is, for me, this been a theme for the last couple of years doing the work that I've been doing. And it's at times hilarious to kind of understand that, but it's also quite destabilizing. And my own experiences here, I guess, is that when we are living from a more fear-based perspective, we cling on to things a little bit more rigidly to give us a sense of safety. So another compassionate way to perceive these things is the more rigid someone's thinking. Sometimes, obviously not always, but we have to be mindful that sometimes that's coming from a sense of fear or concern or doubt or lack of something. And I think that's just so important, that we can take these steps back and start to understand where people's behaviors, thoughts, concepts are coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And none of that is more important than doing that with ourselves too. So when we react in a way where we're like, upon reflection, I probably would not like to have reacted that way if I had the chance again, and but I also know that I probably won't react how I want to when it happens again next time. I just can't control it. That's something to look at for us, and it's not to but not in a compassionate way, not in a judgmental way where God, I'm a bad person, I hate who I am, like I don't want to be that. Why do I keep being this way? This is just a response, a safety mechanism from some point in the past. We've had experiences where it's been important for us to react in a certain way, according to our brain. It may not even have been true to that story, and we've held on to that way of being. And if we can start to see our patterns and start to see our reactions and start to look beyond it, and we start to give ourselves a chance to live more aligned, to become more of the person that actually we want to be, the person that ultimately I come back, I want to be proud of myself. I want to behave in a way that's proud of myself. That's how to build a relationship with the face in the mirror, to feel I'm deeply proud of myself. If I'm behaving as I'm not deeply proud, let's look at that with compassion, because I'm not choosing to be this way, but it's something is triggering me to respond that way. There's real learning, but it's got to be a compassionate learning.
Yeah, I love that. Um, it reminds me of a little question I used to ask myself, actually. For no reason do I not ask it anymore, but it's this idea of, what's the message I am sending myself through this behavior? And is that one that I want to receive ultimately? So again, I guess it comes back to this concept of mindfulness and compassion, ultimately having that awareness, being able to step back in that present moment and reflect a little bit, contemplate on whether it's aligned with where you want to be moving towards.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
One thing I'd love to touch on, Ben, which kind of maybe in some ways we could argue might bring a lot of this together, but is kind of your breathwork journey as well, and how you use that and how it fits in with some of the themes that we've been talking about.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, I remember a mutual friend of ours, Richie. I remember the first time 5 years ago him saying, "Oh, like, hey brother, like you come do a breathwork session with me," and I was like, "Yeah, I know how to breathe, and I'm pretty open-minded, but I was like, okay, like, kind of just because he was a friend, I'll give it a go, and then at the end of it, going, what the hell, like, what did you just do? This whole crazy experience just unravels, and from that point onwards, yeah, 5 years ago, it's been a big part of my life, and I talk, everything I've just spoken about is ultimately for me in my language trying to return people back into their heart, get them out of their head and all the judgments and all the rational thinking and all the that goes on in here and return back into this place, into the heart. And the breath is a practical tool that undeniably helps us go into that journey in a physical capacity. And I guess I refer to it as my heart, but I could say it's my right brain. It's a lot of what I'm talking about lives in that right part of the brain: the creativity, the self-expression, the emotion, and breath work done in a certain way, in a consistent manner over a period of time, i.e., for 10, 15, 20, half an hour, even minutes, um, shuts off, closes down the connection that we have to that left side of the brain, which is very rational and logical. That bit closes, and at the same time, the right brain comes more alive, and we tune more into that. And suddenly, emotions come very alive. There's a lot of people who cry through, and they don't even know why, but there's just a lot creativity. Like there's a real aliveness to us, and the things that we like that really matter to us. I want to bring this alive. I really can feel physiological dynamics of our internal state, of our internal body, and it brings us different answers that we don't find in the rational day-to-day experience. And that's what I love about breathwork. It physically takes us into that space. Now, what are you hearing? Now, what can we learn in that space? So, what questions do we ask ourselves at the end of that session? Um, so, it's just a beautiful tool for me to be able to use as a coach to help people enter into that space, rummage around, see what we find, and then to unpack that. Um, so I love it, and you release feel good hormones when you're doing it anyway. You release dopamine, you release DMT, it feels good anyway, which
Yeah.
is nice.
Yeah, and I think you put that so well in regards to, you're accessing different parts of yourself ultimately, I guess. And that can manifest in so many different ways. That can be emotionally, that can be problem solving. Sometimes, people have thoughts and realizations, or concepts come to them in their work life or in family life, etc. It really is a beautiful experience. And I can see how it works so well with your coaching as well. Even using breathwork maybe at the beginning of the session as a way to calm the nervous system, as a way to be able to think more clearly. Um, because I guess, a lot of us, and if you're doing sort of one-to-one coaching, then I imagine that sometimes people are coming from a busy work day, and either they're logging into Zoom or they're coming maybe to see you in person somewhere. And we know that if we're in a state of stress, we don't think clearly. The brain literally is not working at its best, shall we say. So even using basic breathwork principles as a way to drop in and to feel where we're at, as a way to then get the most out of your curiosity and your wisdom, it's such a powerful tool.
Yeah, it is. And it's really empowering the client, let's say in this instance, to hear the answers that are within them, because we all have our hearts, we all have our own values, let's say. And for me, my heart is my deepest values. It's what I seek most deeply. It's not coming from fear and rationale, or from our traumas that are stored in the logical brain that's understood all the perspectives that we've had through all the experiences we've had in our life. This is just raw. This is the truth of who we are at our core, at everything added on top. And so it's a deeper value. It's like what we really seek. And I've completely lost my thread of what I was saying to that. But yeah, the breath work allows us to go into that place. It allows them to feel into actually like real clarity. And you said that, like we can get real clarity, perspective that we don't often find. And that I can't give them that. That lives inside of them. My job as a coach, I'm sure it is for you a lot of the time as well. You're just trying to help them find their answers and give them the space to do that. I can't tell them. I'm not here to say this should be your value. They need to feel that and experience that and choose that themselves. And that's what we're doing in breath work. And you can't do that in the day to day. And just following on from what you said as well, like of course, like we do live busy, stressful lives, and when we are stressed, of course, which part of the brain are we going to use more? The rational, logical one that's trying to keep things safe and in order and make sure everything is okay, because it's a stressful situation, and we need to be logical, we need to be rational, we need to be on high alert. Of course, like we can't access that part. And how many of us live in a constant state of just continual rational logic, working everything out? And I come to this place. My dad is a lawyer, and he's very left brain. Very, of course, he has to be. I long not to hear from people with their logical, rational explanations of things, but I long to feel what's inside of them. And that doesn't come through speaking sense. It comes from a deeper, like, what's inside of you, though? Let me into that. And all of this is all entwined in breath work for me. Yeah.
Beautiful. Um, there's a term in sort of the psychedelic space of how psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers of whatever's present, and I think it's exactly the same for breath work. Whatever's going on under the surface, it's an opportunity for it to come to the surface, and in some ways, therefore, I think it gives us beautiful insight into ourselves and how we're living and what is truly going on. So yeah, that clarity is something that we all ultimately, I think, seek. This idea of what you said earlier, we're all consciously, unconsciously seeking connection and tribe. I think it's maybe the same a little bit with clarity as well. It can really make a difference.
Yeah. So many of us live in conflict, I think, in terms of, the way I describe it is what we think and what we know. And what we think goes on in our head, and what we know lives in our heart. And you can hear it in people's language that thinking is often shoulds or must or needs, and all that stuff is very logical, it's rational, it's what we're working out. But underneath all that is a knowing.
Yeah.
There's just a knowing, and I can't explain it, and it might not make rational sense, but I just know. And that's our truth. But how many of us actually access and feel into that? We tend to live up here, don't we? And what we think and what we should and what we must.
Yeah. And we think that what we're thinking is the truth often. We're attached to those thoughts so much.
Yeah.
But I was actually just doing a tiny bit of journaling before our chat. I wanted to kind of drop myself into the space a little bit. And one of the things that came to mind was, how do you know when it's a fuck yeah? It is, as you say, it's a physical sensation. I think it isn't in the head, it is in the heart, and it's in the gut. And I can think of a handful of times in my 37 years on this planet, I think, when I've had those sensations of, yes, this is an absolute full on 100% yes that I'm doing this. And I can only suspect that some of us have never really had that sensation, or we're not aware of the sensation, because it requires dropping into the body and getting out of the head. And as we've said, I think throughout today's conversation, really, that as a society and culture, we're kind of encouraged in some ways to stay in the head. And breath work, conversations with people that make you feel safe, what is required for us to learn just to drop into that body, into the heart space. So yeah, thank you, Ben.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure to have these conversations. So thank you for giving me space to share with you.
So with all of that in mind, is there anything that you'd like to finish the podcast with? Anything you want to reiterate, or anything that is organically maybe coming up for you?
Whenever I do a talk, or if I'm on stage, I am trying to help people get into the heart, and that's the journey that I try and take people on. But it is really important. I always end in that, life is about balance, and of course, this isn't to dismiss, the role of the head and the role of our thoughts. They are really important. It's just that for me, the balance is wrong in society, and we're too aligned to our head, and we're too disconnected to our hearts. And it's just about finding that balance and bringing our heart alive, so we can live in a more harmonious state where, sure, we recognise when we're at work, we do bring our logical mind, and we do sit in that space, but we recognise that it's also important to let go of that in other parts of our life too. And everything comes back to balance, and the contrasts, and allowing for all of that, and not just getting stuck in our patterns that we're used to. I think that's what it comes down to for me, and trying to readdress that balance is my work.
Amazing. Ben, thank you so much for sparing the time. I think hopefully we might be able to do a round two at some point in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I'd love that. It's lovely to connect. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ben.